Welcome everyone to the Jet to Japan Brown Bag Lecture by the Mansfield Center. My name is Matthew. I'm a communications fellow. We're honored today to have Miyuki Suka from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Japan Seattle office, as well as Chelsea Robinson, who will be leading the brown bag today. I have to read this. This event will be videotaped by Missoula Community Access Television as part of its Media Assistance Grants Program to nonprofit organizations. For more information about the grant program, please contact MCAT at 542-6228. If you need any more information about this, you can ask Caitlin. So please, thank you. Go ahead. Thanks for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Again, my name is Chelsea, and I am the JET Program Coordinator with the Japanese Consulate in Seattle. You all are in my jurisdiction, so I am here to talk to you about the JET program today. How many of you had heard of the JET program? I mean, obviously you're here. Were you familiar with it before like a day or so ago? Yeah? Okay, great. Very cool. I am going to tell you a little bit about the program itself, about its history, the application process, and that kind of thing. But before we do that, I think we're going to actually start with a video. This video just came out recently. It's pretty cool, and it'll give you, I think, at least it'll give you a good idea of what the environment is actually like in Japanese schools, the kinds of people who participate in JET and that kind of thing. So let's watch that.
And they put us on the local contestant track in our case. And just keep going, everyone's getting on the suit, getting off the soccer, wherever they get off. And I'm like the last person on the train. I'm like, what are we gonna do? Well, I just see like farm and mountains off the distance. I really didn't know what I was getting into going to JET.
So JET is an amazing opportunity to go to Japan, to go to another country, to live in another country, to work in another culture, and really get to know people. You really don't know what impact you have on their lives, and a lot of times you won't know until it's time for you to leave, and that's when they come up to you and they will say, you know, I really loved your class, and it was because of your class, or it was because of you that I wanted to study English in university, or I want to do something that I never thought I could do.
I would say the JET program is at least a one-year experience where Americans, in my case Americans or foreigners, have the chance to live and work in Japan, and they're working in the school system, teaching English, or offering opportunities for international exchange.
There is no average day. Every day is different.
I would like to work with my mamachari, which is essentially a ride on a bicycle.
You kind of pass students on the way, kind of riding to school with your student.
On entering school, I would take off my shoes and I would put on some slippers.
There's always a morning meeting.
The first thing I would do is just log in, sort of. So I take my hanko, my little stamp, and stamp the book to show that I was there.
There would be a little break, and at 8:30 the first period would start.
I work at 8 different elementary schools.
3 schools, 12 to 15 different schools.
I had about 17 schools.
I would teach 3 to 4 classes.
I had a little stick together, like a stand-up routine.
Performing skits or playing silly games.
The thing I like the most is the interaction with the students, definitely. They have so much energy.
My students inspire me every single day.
After school, I'm really active in the dance club.
I myself played table tennis.
I loved doing drama club. That was probably my favorite. We loved to hear music. That was the number one thing.
I was in the small town of Shinto-Cho, Hokkaido.
I was in Mie-ken. I lived in Mie Prefecture. Hyogo Prefecture.
Kumamoto Prefecture,
Kagoshima Prefecture.
Nagasaki Prefecture.
Fukushima Prefecture. Niigata Prefecture.
I was in a really small rural town, so there was rice fields around where I lived and also around the school.
They were a really great community. I've had even people that I didn't really know that well come up and talk to me. Everyone was super interested. They were interested in America. They were interested in me. It was something I wouldn't have expected going in there.
The best advice I could give any new jet is don't turn down any invitation. You get invited to do some of the most ridiculous things, but take advantage. You will climb to the top of Mount Fuji, you will plant rice, you will go to an onsen, you will eat the weirdest things, but those are all about these experiences that you're going to have while in the jet program. If I could sum up the jet program in one word, I would say revolutionary. I would say adventure. Modainai, which means don't be wasteful.
Unforgettable.
Transformative.
Just absolutely amazing. Loyal.
Epic. Excitement.
life-changing, life-altering. In Japanese, I would say kizuna.
Ichigo Ichie.
Never in my life before or since have I been surrounded by so many people from different countries in one place.
My experience has literally changed my whole life. I feel that any experience you do with a job is opening one door. But the JET program, it was like opening 100 doors at once for me. And I really think that if you go on the JET program, you're going to feel empowered by not just the possibilities of humanity, the ability to find common ground, but also your own personal prospects for the future.
I still talk about jet all the time, and I'm still in love with Japan, and you will fall in love with Japan and the people, and it is the best experience you could ever do for yourself.
Awesome. What did you guys think of the video? It's new. I'd love to get feedback. Useful? Okay. Okay. I'm glad. I think it really gives you a chance, again, just to get to see the faces of the kids, most of all, which I think is probably for a lot of people the most meaningful thing about participating in JET, are the connections that you make with your students and the connections that you make with your community. So the JET program, incidentally, is anyone planning on applying this year? Anyone know that they're applying? Okay, cool. That's good to know. So about a little introduction to the JET program. JET stands for Japan Exchange and Teaching. So we're the Japan Exchange and Teaching program. It's one of the largest English teaching programs of its type anywhere in the world. It's on its 30th anniversary this year, which is great. And it promotes, of course, it's geared toward increasing English language education in Japan, but more than that, it's really focused on grassroots internationalization and grassroots cultural exchange. Those sound like kind of abstract terms. I'll talk a little bit more about what that actually means in real life later on in the lecture today. To give you an idea of how many participants are in Japan, when the program started 30 years ago, we had just under 100 JET program participants. You actually have an alum from the very first year of JET here on campus in your journalism department, so that's pretty cool. As you can see, the number peaked once in early 2000s. It declined again, but now it is on the rise. And the good news is currently there are about 5,000 JET program participants in Japan, and the Japanese government is looking to increase that number to over 6,000 in preparation for the Tokyo Olympics, which are coming up in 2020. Yay! The JET program is a full-time paid position, so it is not a volunteer program. It's not study abroad. It is a full-time paid job. It allows you, although you are teaching and you're working full-time, it also really allows you the chance to experience immersion in a foreign culture. It's a cultural exchange, so you are there not only, of course, to learn about Japan. I'm guessing that because you're here, you have an interest in Japan, but also to share your own home culture and your own home country and things about yourself with your students. It will definitely be difficult at times. There will be challenges that you meet in your everyday life in Japan that you cannot anticipate at this point. But it's also a really life-changing experience, and overcoming those challenges in your daily life, I think, is really transformative for pretty much everyone who participates in the program. I'll talk a little bit about the two major positions that are offered with JET. About 90% of our 5,000 JET program participants are working as ALTs. That stands for Assistant Language Teacher. ALTs are mostly assigned to public schools. We have a few in private schools, but for the most part, you would be teaching in a public school. They're at all levels of education, elementary through high school. I've even known a couple people who taught in preschools. And we have lots of different kinds of placements. Some ALTs might be based at just one school and stay at that school every single day. Other ALTs may have multiple schools that they rotate to, like you heard in the video just now. I think having 17 schools is not a very common pattern. It does happen. But more commonly, I think you would see people having maybe 3 or 4. As an example, in my town, we had 2 ALTs, and they both taught at 1 junior high school and 3 elementary schools, and that covered all of the junior high and elementary schools in our town. Yes, you have a question.
Like, how, I'm kind of confused, like how they go to different schools. Like, is it on
It depends on where you are. If you're in a very rural area, you may need to have a vehicle, or you may have somebody who's in charge of driving you to your different schools. A lot of people commute by bicycle or walking, or by some form of public transportation, so it's really going to depend on where you are. I should say, too, that with JET, you will hear over and over and over again, every situation is different. You'll get sick of hearing it, but it's very true. Any examples that I give you today are just examples that I've had in my personal experience as a JET. Your results may vary. And this is important to say because you know, everybody has a different experience on the JET program. That being said, I think most people have a really, really positive and really wonderful experience. So what an ALT does, they are team teaching with a Japanese teacher of English, or a JTE. So this means, you know, they're not usually in charge of things like discipline and classroom flow. They have that assistance from a Japanese teacher. Most importantly, of course, on top of teaching pronunciation and providing the kids a good listening guide from a native speaker, or at least a fluent speaker of English, they're there to motivate the students. What that means is that you get to talk a lot about your background. You might give a lesson on your family, or your favorite holidays in the United States, your favorite foods from home, that kind of thing. So you're really bringing in a personal touch and getting the kids excited about the United States, or excited about learning English. For those of you, and I'm sorry if I'm repeating myself for those of you who heard me earlier, but how many of you are studying a foreign language right now? Okay. Do you ever have trouble maintaining perspective on the fact that that's something fun that you could use to, you know, make friends, or read a book, or watch a movie? You know, when you're drilling on vocabulary and grammar every single day, I think sometimes it can be easy to lose perspective on the fact that your foreign language is also something really fun and really cool that you can use to connect with people. So the role of the ALT largely is to do that, to provide that sort of human connection to their students. I don't know how familiar you are with English language education in Japan, but, or with the education system there in general, but their education system really puts a lot of weight on exams. Students in middle school are studying really hard for their high school examinations. Students in high school are studying really hard for their college examinations. And those kind of determine the course of their life. And English is one of the subjects that they're being tested on. And in fact, starting in 4th grade now, I believe English is a mandatory subject for all students in public schools. So English is super, super important, and they need to do really well. They're getting drilled a lot in grammar and vocabulary, and it can be really, really easy for them to think, oh, I'm bad at English because I did poorly on this grammar test. And as we all know, if you've spoken a foreign language, that's not always the case. There's a lot of different elements that go into learning a language, so you get to provide that fun element that gets kids excited. You might also be involved in planning or assisting in planning lessons with your JTEs. You may be creating teaching materials. You might be coming up with games. And you may be involved in a lot of other extracurricular activities. One example, a lot of ALTs are involved in an English speech contest at some point during the year, and you might help your students by coaching them. Outside of that, there are a lot of fun extracurricular activities that ALTs are involved in. As an example, school festivals. Most schools in Japan have a cultural festival at some point during the year. They have a sports festival sometime during the year. And those are things that are largely student-driven. So the students really get a chance to take leadership positions, to work on their teamwork. And that's a really great opportunity for you to see your kids expressing themselves, working really hard. And they have fun playing with you and interacting with you at those events. You might go on field trips. You might be involved in after-school clubs. I know a lot of people in the video mentioned after-school clubs. Certainly a lot of ALTs are involved in English Club. That might be a group of kids who are interested in learning to communicate in English a little bit more. They're excited to meet you. That's the draw of English Club. That being said, if you have another hobby, for example, if you play baseball or you play music or you like to do art, you may be able to join another club that's related to your hobby, and that could be a really cool way for you to connect with your students outside of the English classroom. And you might even be able to connect with students who maybe aren't that great in their English classes or are nervous that English is not their greatest subject. You could connect with them over art or music or sports. There's another job position with the JET program, the CIR, the Coordinator of International Relations. This is what I did for 3 years in Ishikawa Prefecture. You're working in, instead of a school, you're usually working in a local government office. So this might be a Board of Education, this might be a city hall, it might be a prefectural office. They're utilizing Japanese every day in the workplace. So this position, unlike the ALT position, does require a high level of Japanese proficiency. Our ALTs are not necessarily required to have any Japanese language background at all, incidentally, although it certainly helps if you do. Will make your life more comfortable. But the CIRs are required to have a very high level of Japanese proficiency. If you're familiar with the JLPT, the Japanese Language Proficiency Test, we're usually looking for N2 or N1. You don't have to have actually taken the test, but the equivalent of that level. CIRs do a whole lot of different kinds of things depending on where they get placed. In a bigger city where there's a lot of call for it, they might be involved in a lot of translation and interpretation. So you might be interpreting for foreign dignitaries who are visiting. You might be translating materials that are meant for foreign visitors or residents. In a smaller town, for example, my town was around 35,000 people, I was involved in a lot of event planning. So I planned international events throughout the year that were meant not for the foreign residents so much usually as the Japanese residents. And that was adults and kids, to give them a chance just to interact with other foreign residents and also to learn more about the world. They might also be involved in a sister city relationship. You might also do school visits or teach English. So this is another really fun job. And even if you're an ALT, you may very well have a lot of interaction with the CIRs in your area because they are always looking for volunteers to staff their events. Support for the JET program. One of the really big benefits of participating in JET, especially as opposed, I think, to other English teaching programs in Japan, is that a lot of support is provided for you. There are 4 Japanese government organizations that are responsible for overseeing JET. Claire, in particular, provides a whole lot of training and materials, not only for the outgoing JETs, and not only for the current JETs, but also for the contracting organizations, the boards of education, and the schools that employ JETs. So there's a lot of support that's available for you from the government. On top of that, within your prefecture, you'll have a prefectural advisor who is one of your fellow JETs, whose job it is to check in on you, make sure you're doing okay. They can be a liaison with your school or your contracting organization if issues come up. And then you also have the support of the JET community. As I said, there are 5,000 JET program participants in Japan right now, so that's a huge number of people. And the JET community is a great community of people to be a part of. This has been my personal experience, but JETs are absurdly good at sharing information with each other, writing up really, really detailed guides on every aspect of daily life in Japan. So even if you're not on JET, you go to Japan, you have a problem in your life, look it up. There is probably a JET out there who has written a guide to how to deal with it. And that ranges from everything from like how to pick out cold medicine to how to use your rice cooker or your washing machine, how to bug bomb your apartment is unfortunately something that came up for someone, but she had an unfortunate experience, but she turned that into something good. She wrote a guide, and now that exists for other jets to use. So again, I have never been a part of a community of people that is more proactive about helping each other out. It's a really, really good way to live comfortably in Japan. There's also AJET, which is the Association of Jets. This is a organization, a volunteer organization for current jets. All of Japan is divided into AJET blocks, so no matter where you go, you'll be part of an AJET block. Those AJET blocks put on events throughout the year. They might be involved in volunteering. And there's also a really great thing about AJET is that they have a lot of special interest groups. So there are some examples up here. Stonewall Jet is for LGBT jets. There's a Jets of African Descent, a vegetarian jet group. A lot of different religious denominations have an AJET group. So all of these groups, right, are maybe they each have special interests and special difficulties that they might encounter in their life in Japan. So there are these predetermined communities for you to sort of become a part of that can help you figure out those more difficult things about your life in Japan. In addition to all of that, there's a lot of training provided for jets. We would be providing training for you before you depart. You participate in Tokyo orientation once you arrive in Japan. There's probably a prefectural orientation for you. So that's as far as teaching and daily life stuff goes. There's also Japanese training available. As I said, for ALTs, we don't require that you have a specific level of Japanese ability. Some people come in with 0. Some people come in with quite a lot. That's fine. What we're looking for, I would say, is more someone who is willing to improve from whatever level they're at. So if you're starting from 0, we're looking for somebody who's willing to learn the basics. If you're starting from somewhere in between, really proficient, we're looking for somebody who's passionate about learning more. To that end, the JET program, Claire, provides some training materials for you. You can choose to take a placement exam for 3 different levels of Japanese classes that are provided for you for free. So this is a really great resource for you. During your 2nd and 3rd and subsequent years, you can also apply to participate in some other further training programs. I did this translation and interpretation course, and it was amazing. It was really, really helpful to me. It involved an intensive interpretation seminar where we went and stayed at a training facility for a few days and woke up in the morning and did interpretation all day until late at night. It was really excellent for my interpretation skills. So there's a lot of training, really great training opportunities provided for JET program participants. I'll talk a little bit about the workplace, about what you should expect from your work in Japan. First of all, it's very important to understand that you are not an employee of Claire, you're not an employee of the Japanese consulate, and you are not an employee of the JET program while you're on JET. You are employed by a contracting organization. So that would be your school, if you only have one base school. That might be a board of education. That might be a government office. And this is why every situation on JET is different. Not only is Japan a very diverse diverse country from one end to the other, but also every contracting organization might have slightly different rules and regulations. But everyone on JET is working as a civil servant. So what that means, we have civil servants here in the United States too. My experience with Japan is that being a civil servant is taken very, very seriously. You are held to a very high behavioral and moral standard as a civil servant. On top of that, a lot of our jets really physically stand out living in Japan. So that means everyone will know who you are. Everyone will know where you live. Everyone will know what you buy at the grocery store every week. It can be a little bit of pressure, to be honest. The flip side of that and the good side of that is that you have a really honored position in the community. And so you really, people really look up to you, they really respect you, they're really interested to get to know you, and they're really proactive a lot of the time in inviting you out to participate in events. So you will definitely get invited to go to cultural festivals and seasonal festivals and other town events. It's just a really great way to be involved in the community. Yeah.
Now, Jet, to be able to do it, do they set you up with the ability to get a visa?
Yes. Yeah. So let's see, we have a 1-year contract period initially, and you can extend for up to 3 and oftentimes up to 5 years. A lot of people that I know, especially people who weren't either majoring in Japanese or education, thought, well, I'll just do 1 year and then I'll come back home. My experience has been that most people choose to stay for at least 2 or 3. By the end of your first year, you finally kind of got the hang of it. Everybody knows who you are, you feel really comfortable, and you're ready to take on new projects. So I recommend staying for 2 years, but that being said, we certainly have people who just need a break year in between maybe going on to graduate school or doing something else, and you have another obligation, or you have some other reason why you can't stay longer. A year is the minimum contract. Working hours and holidays. In general, you'll be working around 35 hours a week, which is a very moderate amount of time for a full-time job. You have a lot of time to participate in extracurricular activities, to participate in community events, and also to pursue any kind of hobbies or studying for the GRE or other kinds of personal betterment activities that you want to take part in. A typical workday usually goes from around 8:30 to 4:30 or 5. You'll have at least probably 10 days of paid vacation per year, and there are also 15 Japanese national holidays. So you do have quite a bit of free time. We do encourage our ALTs to save their time off for school breaks so that you're not missing classes. But in general, you have quite a bit of flexibility. Remuneration and benefits, this is important. Again, it is a full-time job. You can see the salary up here. This is public information. It could change from year to year, but it's usually around this. Comes out to about $33,000, $34,000 a year your first year, and bumps up a little bit every year after that. So again, this is, especially in a rural area, this is more than enough money to save some money, to start paying off your student loans, to travel in Japan, or to travel somewhere else in Asia, and also pay your rent and pay your daily living costs.
I kind of had a question about that. So,
Yeah.
So yeah, I would be paying off my student loans, but like I guess I'm sort of lost on how would the yen go to dollars, and how much of that would be like taxed and stuff.
You don't pay, assuming you do all your paperwork right, you do not pay U.S. income tax on the income that you make in Japan. It's a tax treaty that exists. So some jets are required to pay Japanese income tax, but it's generally lower than it is in the United States. There are some remuneration systems that exist for you to send money back home. They would talk more about the specifics of banking in the training leading up to departure. But yeah, it's really actually fairly easy to manage your finances. And again, you'll have the support of other American jets who are also going through the same thing. Did that answer your question?
I believe so.
Okay, great. The JET program also covers your transportation to and from Japan. And you're also enrolled in Japanese national health insurance. This is a system that everyone who lives long-term in Japan pays into. It's very different from our US health care system. And in general, also medical care in Japan is significantly cheaper than it is here. And then Japanese national health insurance pays 70% of your medical costs. So you are really quite well taken care of as far as medical things are concerned during your time on JET. I'm sorry, I have a little bit of a cold and my throat is just a little bit tickly. So if I cough, I am so sorry. Talk a little bit about living situations, because this I get asked about a lot. For approximately 5,000 jets in Japan, we have about 5,000 different living situations. So this is definitely a situation where every situation is different, really applies. Anything here that I talk about, again, is just my experience, what I have seen on JET, and is not necessarily representative of everyone's experience. That being said, a lot of times what happens with JET for housing is that you inherit a position that was occupied by another JET before you, and that may include an apartment. Some boards of education or schools might own or lease some housing that they would then sublease to their jets. And oftentimes it might also come with some appliances. You might be inheriting or buying some of your predecessor's stuff if they decided to go back to their home country. So a lot of times that's what happens, and that's what I've seen a lot with JET. That being said, with more new positions being added all the time, we certainly have positions that were not occupied by previous jets. In that case, you should have some support from your supervisor in finding housing. You should not be completely on your own, but everyone's results may vary a little bit with this. That being said, basically all jets have their own housing. You're not going to have a roommate. You're not really doing a homestay. In most cases, that's an apartment. Some big divisions as far as housing and daily life go, though, are between rural and urban placements. Rural areas, of course, have cheaper, larger housing than really dense cities. It can be a lot easier to save money if you're living in a rural area. And you really get to experience traditional Japan. Some of the little rural towns are really cool, and a lot of the sort of older ways of life that you don't see as much in the cities are still very much maintained in rural areas. I don't know if my bias is coming through. I really like rural placements on JET, and I highly recommend them. You'll also have those really friendly, curious neighbors who know where you are and know what you eat. But this is, again, a good thing because it's great to have people who are outgoing and excited about learning about you. That gives you lots of opportunities to make friends and get involved in your community. And in that way, because you're really immersed in Japanese all the time, you get to learn Japanese really, really quickly, regardless of what level you're starting at. Yes?
How is transportation between rural Japan and to cities?
I'll talk about that a little bit. I'll talk about the urban areas, and then we'll talk about the contrast. Cities, obviously, you tend to have more access to convenient public transportation. You might have direct access to the big train lines. Rural jets oftentimes some placements require that you own a car, especially in very rural areas if you have multiple schools that you're going to. I had 9 different preschools that I had to visit, and they were all out in very, very different areas of my very large, geographically very large town. So my position required that I own a car. In the neighboring town, the other CIR that I knew, her Board of Education would not allow any of the jets to drive their own vehicles for town work. So they all had to drive town cars. So it can vary a lot. You can also designate that you can designate on the application whether or not you have a driver's license and whether or not you'd be willing to drive in Japan. So if you're really concerned about it or you don't drive, it's not necessarily a requirement, and you can let us know ahead of time.
When you say own a car, did you have to buy one while you were over there?
I bought one myself, yes.
I didn't know if they shipped it, but that'd be really expensive.
No, yeah, no, I bought a car there. Some people lease them. There's a lot of support and a lot of information for that.
I was kind of like, so I guess my Montana driver's license, I guess, expires next year, but but I heard like through AAA you can get like an international driver's license.
Yeah, and again, this is stuff that we would talk more about at training, but it is possible to get an international driver's permit that's valid for 1 year. After that, you would have to switch to a Japanese driver's license. Other good things about living in a city, you have more access to Japanese language schools, more options for shopping and recreation. This is typical city stuff. And you might have more jets in your area. Some really tiny towns might only have 1 jet. Bigger cities tend to have more. As far as placement goes with the JET program, we have a lot of jets who are placed in smaller towns. There aren't that many in really big urban areas. You can request up to 3 locations when you apply for JET. I would say it is not very common to get your really specific placement request granted unless you have a very good reason. A very good reason would include having a spouse who already lives in Japan, who you want to go live with, maybe specific medical concerns. And that's about it as far. Sometimes we'll have like sister city relationships that, so I think actually sometimes people from Montana get sent to Kumamoto, people out of Washington tend to get sent to Hyogo, but that's always also, again, not a guarantee. So I would encourage you to be really, really open-minded about your placement. I requested 3 places that I had lived before in Japan. I was not sent to any of those places. In fact, I had never heard of Ishikawa Prefecture before. And I was like, where is this? I don't really know if I want to go here. What is even there? What is this place? I was open-minded. I really wanted to do JET. I went. It was great. Ishikawa is a really, really, really cool place. It's also really insular and really kind of like geographically isolated. So I don't think it would have been a very easy place to get to know if I hadn't been able to live there long term. I love my town. I had a really great experience. And I know so many other jets who have just become like the biggest ambassadors for whatever little tiny town they were sent to. You get to learn that community more intimately than probably anyone else from your country, right? So you get to be the American expert on your community, and that's a really cool feeling. So again, I would encourage you to be open-minded. That being said, there are some more general placement requests that you can make, like you would rather be in a slightly more urban area or a more rural area. You can request different levels of school, and those more general requests tend to be a little bit easier to grant. So think about that as you're filling out your application. I do want to talk about the application process. I know we don't have that much more time left. The two really big major criteria for folks here are that you do need to have a bachelor's degree and you need to be a US citizen in order to apply through a consulate in the United States. JET is provided it does exist in other countries, so it's not necessarily the case that non-US citizens can't participate. We're looking for people obviously with excellent English written and verbal skills because you will be teaching English. And we're looking for people with a strong interest in Japan and Japanese culture specifically. Things that make a really great JET that we're looking for in our JET program participants. Adaptability and flexibility are super important. And having a positive attitude. The reasons for this, you will be that person who shows up on school picture day. You didn't know it was school picture day. You're wearing a bright red shirt. Everyone else is wearing black and white. You don't have time to go home and change. What are you going to do? So being able to be humble, to roll with the punches, and to kind of laugh it off is a really, really important ability for ALTs in particular. Another thing we're looking for, initiative. A way that you could avoid that school picture situation is if you take the initiative to approach the teachers that you work with or approach the scheduler and say, hey, what's on the schedule for this week? They might forget that your Japanese is not so good that you can understand everything that's going on in morning meeting. They might forget to tell you what's coming up on the schedule that week. So you being able to take the initiative and be outgoing and talk to people is really important. We're looking for people with a passion for education. That doesn't mean that it has to be your long-term career goal. This can be education in a very broad sense. And we're looking for people with a genuine interest in Japan. So especially things that you would definitely want to bring up on the application and things that could make you a stronger applicant if you're thinking of applying. Teaching background, we're having more and more people coming from teaching background, people with a TESOL certification, that kind of thing. That doesn't mean that you have to have that. If you do have it, that's great, and that's a plus. But if you don't have that, look for opportunities to volunteer or work with kids. Look for student tutoring opportunities, those kinds of things that demonstrate that you have some teaching aptitude. Similarly with Japanese, again, we're not looking for a specific level of Japanese proficiency for the ALT position, but we are looking for people, maybe start doing a little bit of self-study by yourself right now. Start watching Japanese movies and demonstrate to us that you would be willing to learn more if you were living in Japan. The application timeline. Applications just opened today. Hooray, that's so exciting. So do look for those. They are online. They are on the JET Program USA website. For those of you who are not seniors and are not applying this year, applications usually, again, will be available in late September or early October. They're going to be due this year on November 18th. And then people who are accepted during that application cycle would be going to Japan in July of 2017. Placement information usually comes out in the spring, so you'd be finding out if you were accepted to the program in about April, and then moving right on to finding out more specifically which prefecture you're going to later on in the spring. Some helpful hints for the application process. Please read all the instructions very, very, very carefully. This is a Japanese government program. There are a lot of very specific instructions. And you demonstrating that you are able to follow all of them and read and understand them all is part of the way that we're evaluating you. So do please be very, very careful in the application. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me, and I am more than happy to answer them for you. Answer all the questions as directed. There are a couple of questions that come up on the application that might seem a little strange to you. Specifically, we're going to ask you about criminal background and your medical history. These are things that probably would not come up on a US job application, but it's very important that you disclose anything. Specifically with criminal background, sometimes people who maybe had something during their, when they were a minor, they think it was expunged or it's not on their record anymore. It will show up on an FBI background check, and if it shows up later and you didn't report it, it's going to be a problem. Chances are, if it was something minor, if you report it and you give us the details of what happened, then oftentimes that's not a problem. But do be honest about those things. Similarly with the medical background information, we are wanting to make sure that you're going to be safe and comfortable in Japan, and that's why we ask for that information. So do be candid with that. If you have any questions, again, feel free to contact me, and I'm more than happy to talk to you about it. But we want to make sure that you'll have access to prescription medication, that you've thought about, if you have medical conditions that are maybe in remission or that you're not dealing with currently, that the stress of living in Japan might bring those up again. So what are you going to do? We want to make sure that you're thinking about it. Get someone to proofread your entire application, especially the essay, because that is the most important thing. And send the application before the deadline. Check out the website. This is a really great website. It has lots of good information. That's, again, where the applications are, and they just became available today. Even if you're not applying this year, there's a lot of information about what kinds of documents are needed for the application on this website, so check it out early. And feel free to contact me at any time. I'm usually in Seattle, but I am happy to answer questions by email or phone. So I look forward to hearing from all of you. And I wonder if anyone has any questions. Yeah?
So you mentioned a lot that there's rural placements in Japan. I think a lot of us in Montana are familiar with rural. I'm wondering just exactly how rural that means. To me, Missoula is big.
Yeah. Yeah, again, if you're coming from a small town in Montana, then it might not be that much of a shock for you. Rural in Japan is different than in the United States, with the exception of maybe some places in Hokkaido up on the northern island, where there really is a lot of open farm space. Rural in Japan tends to be, because Japan is a really mountainous country, rural in Japan tends to be maybe a tiny village that's nestled in a really mountainous area. And it might not be that far from the next town, but each of those little villages can be really kind of geographically secluded. We do also have some placements that are on islands. We sent at least one person to an island where I believe she is the only jet this year. Sometimes those islands are quite a few hours away from the mainland by boat. These placements are not very common. They do happen. If you would be open to a really rural placement, then please put that on your application. Again, I think those are the coolest places. Everybody is so excited to have you there. People are really excited to get to know you, and there's probably a really unique history. There might be unique cuisine. There might be unique language, and you get the chance to spend really quality time there and get to know it. So again, for those of you who are living here in Montana who are comfortable living in rural areas, think about it. It could be really cool. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Now, for after that 5-year extension, like, is there would you have to detach from Jet and then go back to that same company to be able to stay there?
Yes. So usually Jet does not turn into a long-term career, and I wouldn't recommend that you think of it that way. I do, again, this is just from my personal experience. I know 1 or 2 people who got along really, really, really well with their contracting organization and ended up staying for a career. But it doesn't happen very often at all. And it really has to do with your relationship with your Board of Education and your situation. That being said, Claire is introducing more and more opportunities for you to find other jobs in Japan after JET. So just a couple years ago, they started doing a career fair in Tokyo where they bring in Japanese companies who are looking to hire former JETs. So there definitely are opportunities for other kinds of job placements in Japan. If your Japanese isn't quite good, it can be hard to get a position with a Japanese company. So a lot of people who stay on maybe end up teaching English somewhere else. But if your Japanese is quite good, there may be opportunities for you to work in Japan. I didn't talk about the JET Alumni Association, but we also have a lot of JET alumni in the United States. The JET Alumni Association has chapters all over the world, and that can be a really good career networking opportunity if you come back here. Get involved with them, get on their mailing list, and they will share information about careers and opportunities. I probably maybe have time for one more question. I know maybe some of you need to take off for classes, but well, thank you all so much for your time today, and I'll be standing here for at least a couple more minutes. Thank you very much.